Good afternoon, and welcome to the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions. My name is Kimberly Jackson, and I'm the Executive Director, and I'm so honored to have you for our new year with ISPS. Today, we start our new economic series that we plan to launch the entire year, and we're so honored to have Representative Kathy Castor with us to talk about clean energy and the economy. It's a pleasure because St. Petersburg College is committed to making our students rise in this industry. Before I begin, I'd like to share a little bit about ISPS for those of you all who are new to our think tank. On our website, you can find a ton of information, but in short, ISPS was created by Congressman Bill Young, who thought that innovation in bipartisan and collective discussion was important. He really sought to have a think tank where people could come together to know the scope of government and what it could and could not do, and have political, social, and economic discussions about this. We have an exceptional board, and we invite you to learn more about ISPS on our website or on Facebook or our new Instagram. So again, thank you for your time. I would be remiss if I did not thank Dr. Tanja Williams, who has been exceptional as a president and so insightful in supporting the think tank, as well as Mark Strickland, the provost of the Seminole campus where we sit. Now let's get started. I'd like to introduce Representative Kathy Castor. Her bio is intense and incredible, and we're very grateful to have her here today. Kathy Castor was elected in 2006 to represent Florida's 14th Congressional District, which includes Tampa and parts of Hillsborough County. Kathy has a long established track record of fighting for all that makes Florida special. She started her professional legal career with the Florida Department of Community Affairs, working to enforce environmental and growth management laws that protect wetlands, Florida's coastline, endangered species, and sensitive lands. In private practice, Castor continued her commitment to Florida's environment as a land use environmental attorney representing local governments. As a Hillsborough County Commissioner, Castor served as chair of the Hillsborough County Environmental Protection Commission that is charged with protecting the air, water, wetlands, and land of our large and diverse county, and the delegated elements of the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts. During the most recent Congress, as well as this one, Kathy was appointed by the U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi as the chair of the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis to continue leading her colleagues in bold action to confront the climate crisis and its escalating costs. This year at ISPS, we're also having moderators to assist with these vast topics, and I'm honored to introduce my colleague, Patrick Luce. Patrick Luce is a native of Massachusetts. He has his BS in Finance and Economics from the University of Tampa and received his MA in Economics from the University of South Florida. He teaches courses in microeconomics, economics, and macroeconomics at St. Petersburg College and focuses on the intersection of textbook concepts and real-world applications. In addition to teaching, Patrick also consults with local governments and is regularly involved with conducting cost of service allocations, long-term financial planning analysis, bond feasibility studies, and economic impact analysis throughout the United States. Patrick is an advocate of capturing appropriate context and informing oneself with knowledge and data. So now that we've gotten through these bios that we have to do, it's obligatory to honor these people. Let's get started. I'd like to say before we begin that Patrick is just a really warm economist. I know that sometimes these conversations can get in depth, and I'm honored to share this platform with him today. And thank you in advance, Representative Castor. Patrick, take it away.
Thank you so much, Kim, and thank you so much, Representative Castor. This is really an exciting time to be talking about how our economy is evolving, and there's so many unique things that are going on in today. And as we push forward, ultimately, there's so many things that we can focus on. And today's conversation is, clean energy and really what are the economic impacts of it, right? And so we're trying to take this very environmentally sound concept of clean energy and layering in the discussion as it relates to the economy. And what really I'm hoping Congresswoman Castor can kind of discuss is why is this such a key part of your agenda? Really, why is this such a focus for you? And um, would love to hear more about your thoughts on the topic.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Professor Luce, and thank you, Kimberly, for that generous intro. And hi to President Dr. Williams. It's a real honor to be with everyone at St. Pete College and the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions, and a special hat tip to my good friends Watson Haynes and Nikki Capehart, who have been involved for many years. Well, happy Friday, everybody. And here we are at quite a precarious moment in history, and a precarious moment for all of our neighbors and our great country. We're in the midst of a raging pandemic where we've lost over 430,000 Americans, still sweeping across the country. We are dealing with the economic fallout from that. Many of our neighbors who have lost jobs or lost wages over time, we've got to get them back on their feet. We just lived through something we thought we would never see, is a violent insurrection, a deadly attack on the US Capitol and the Congress at a time when we were effectuating a peaceful transfer of power. It wasn't so peaceful this time. And then even the recent machinations in the stock market with GameStop. I mean, it's so volatile out there. And amidst all of this, we're dealing with an ongoing climate crisis that is getting worse. And if there's anything I can convey to this group today, it is that we have to act with urgency. But there's good news. Confronting the climate crisis also presents enormous opportunities to create good paying jobs and improve our health, and really answer the moral imperative that we have to our kids and future generations to act. So we start with this sense of urgency because the concentrations of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere are at the highest levels ever. The year 2020, as if 2020 wasn't problematic enough, 2020 was the hottest year on record. It capped the hottest decade on record. And as the Earth heats up, all of the climate-related impacts, like extreme heat, extreme storms, droughts, flooding, wildfires, they're worsening and heaping costs on working families and on small businesses and on our communities. They are impacting our health and the air we breathe, plus the most vulnerable populations, communities of color, low-income communities, impoverished communities, are dealing with this. They are the most at risk, and climate change is a threat multiplier. So to answer the scientific and moral imperative to reduce carbon pollution, we need to understand that it must happen as quickly and as aggressively as possible. And that includes making our communities more resilient. So how are we going to do that? We're going to delve into that today, right, Professor Luce? But from the get-go, that means improving our infrastructure, improving our manufacturing, prioritizing investments at the federal level, state level, local level. We know we're very fortunate across the globe. We have a convener, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. What is that? That is the group of scientists from across the globe that have looked at all of the science and have said that we have to get to net zero greenhouse gas carbon emissions no later than the year 2050. So here we are at the start of 2021. We don't have time to wait until 2045. Most of the very significant actions have to start now. And that means across the economy at an unprecedented scale. And the good news is we have the tools to do it. The beginning of the last Congress, Speaker Pelosi did empower a new select committee on the climate crisis. She asked me to chair it. We did broad outreach all across the country. We asked the faith community, we asked entrepreneurs, scientists, farmers, business leaders, you name it. We said, what are the solutions to get us to that goal of net zero by 2050? And last summer, we issued a major report, a roadmap for the Congress called Solving the Climate Crisis. It's our climate crisis action plan for the Congress to take action. And we had it modeled and by an energy think tank. They said if we enacted our policy recommendations, we could get to 90% of where we need to be by 2050. We would save over 62,000 lives annually, and we would see at least $8 trillion in climate and health benefits. So we have the roadmap, and now we have a new president and an administration committed to climate action. And the Biden administration just this past week has done more on climate policy than the previous administration did in 4 years. So we're poised now to meet our scientific and moral calling. But let's get into the details.
Yeah, thank you so much for that overview. And what kind of really rang true with that is the urgency behind it, right? And trying to get to net zero by 2050 and not kicking the can down the road, right? Starting that now. And as part of this process, you've laid out a roadmap to get there. And I was hoping maybe you could detail some of the maybe specific implementation goals and more broadly, how we're going to get there, right? Because if we think about from an economic context and our macro economy, we have a federal budget and we have state budgets. And are there costs that are going to be imposed within our budget that are going to be reappropriated for elsewhere? And maybe what are some of the tax implications of all of this?
Well, you're right. There are, I think, first and foremost, decarbonizing the electricity sector, the power sector, how we generate electricity is the key, because if we're going to drive cleaner cars, electric vehicles, if we're going to clean up our buildings, the linchpin is a cleaner power sector. So I know we're going to talk about what that means to the state of Florida and the Tampa Bay area, but we are far behind. We know that over time, the United States of America, since the Industrial Revolution, has relied upon fossil fuels to fuel our economy, coal, oil, and gas. Meanwhile, as we have modernized, it has become apparent that we can use the cleaner, cheaper sources of energy, power from the sun, solar, we can use power from the wind. We have the technology to be more efficient. That's the cheapest way to save money on your power bill. So now understanding the damage that carbon pollution and climate change is causing, it's how to make that grand mobilization, that big transition. It's not going to be easy, but I think if we prioritize and understand the power sector is central to that, then that helps us focus and it helps us set some very important goals. In our Solving the Climate Crisis report, we say, okay, we have this deadline of 2050, but to get there and to ramp up renewables, that means we have got to front end load everything we're doing. Most of the renewable resources and solar and wind power are contained in between the Rocky Mountains and the Mississippi River, but the population centers are along the coastline and in other Midwestern areas and in the southern states. So we've got to build the macro grid. We've got to modernize the grid in this country to connect those resources to businesses and people. So that's what we're going to be focused on ASAP, is creating jobs in building that new modern grid. And in Florida, because we have the most potential in solar power. It means unleashing the solar potential that we have here. In Florida, we've relied in the past on coal-fired power plants, and now we're mostly generating our electricity from natural gas. That's not going to cut it. We cannot do that any longer. It's costing us too much in our health and in the bottom line.
And that's really a great point that you made, is those costs, because there's a perception that this movement, this trend is, pricier, more expensive. And so some of the research that we've done shows that, looked up the Yale program on climate change communication, and they conducted a survey on willingness to pay for renewable energy. And while about 50% of people are willing to pay more, there's this perception by the majority of folks, I think it was like 62% of folks, that believe that wind and solar is more expensive than traditional energy sources. And I was hoping I could get your thoughts on those perceptions and how they align with reality, and maybe provide some insights on that.
Yeah, I don't think people buy it anymore. I think that the talking points from fossil fuel company CEOs and electric utilities and certain policymakers, and they're still using these talking points today. We can't afford to move to clean energy. While the truth is, we cannot afford to keep doing what we're doing. Look at these longer, hotter summers that we're having. So that means you're paying more on your electric bill, on your air conditioning bill, especially around here. It means we are paying more on flood insurance. We're paying more on property insurance, because we're having these record-setting seasons on very intense hurricanes that spin up quickly, or tropical storms. Day-to-day flooding, we're spending more of our property taxes and stormwater fees. I mean, think when we have those extreme rain events, it's really gross that our wastewater treatment plants fill up and spill into Boca Ciega Bay or into Tampa Bay. And remember, Florida's economy is directly tied to clean water and clean beaches. So this is all of those small businesses, the mom and pop shops that rely on clean water and clean beaches. Look at the impact from the Deepwater Horizon blowout there in Pinellas County and all across the Florida Gulf Coast. We didn't even have oil wash up on the shores of Pinellas County, but that was devastating for so many of our neighbors and small business owners. So let's not forget, they like to say, oh, we can't afford this, but we're already paying significant dollars. So where do we go from here? We are going to have to make federal investments in clean energy, and we can do that in a number of ways. You can do it through tax credits. You can do it through direct investments, which we intend to do. And we have to be mindful that these investments, it's important to double down in environmental justice communities, into the communities that have carried the burden for generations of dirty air and dirty water. They're the neighborhoods that don't have the same parks. They don't have the same trees. They don't have the same pools where you can cool off during the summer. So you have to keep all of that in mind. You have to keep equity in mind as you make this transition, and you reprioritize where you're spending money.
Patrick, if I may jump in, that's like a perfect transition to our workforce department question. And I'd like to invite those who are on the call to please put your questions in the chat. We will get into it after the moderated conversation. But Dean Ramsey had some very thoughtful questions that he was kind enough to share with me last night. And one I think you sort of just touched on: how can a shift towards clean energy create jobs and economic opportunities for communities of color and low-income communities through job training programs, hiring incentives, affordable solar, and other related green initiatives? And I thought it was such a good question because at the time I was researching some of the comments that President Biden has made about we're going to need engineers and we're going to need scientists and we're going to need manufacturers. But as being a leading innovator in getting people to work at SPC, of course, we're concerned too about exactly what you said, that equitable piece, if you could comment.
I think the opportunities are enormous. And here are a few just off the top of my head. If you remember, after the Great Recession, when President Obama was in office, we passed the Recovery Act. And there were significant investments in job creating industries like weatherizing homes. So that helps put money back into people's pockets because they don't have the leaks in their homes to let the AC out, or they have more efficient appliances. So think of that on steroids of what we have to do for buildings all across America. We've got to put in the smart meters. We've got to put in the insulation. We've got to put in better energy efficient lights, windows. We have to manufacture those things. So that is going to be a big component of it. President Biden also in his executive order this week said we're going to create a new climate corps. Now, way back when FDR was president and we were coming out of the Great Depression, remember in your history books, we created a civilian conservation corps where they improved parkland. They made all sorts of other investments to clean up rivers and bay systems. So again, think about that, a new climate corps on steroids where especially folks in the younger generation who are inspired to help their neighbors and lift the planet, they can go to work on an initiative to help make our communities more resilient. I think that holds great promise. We know when it comes to electric vehicles, we're going to have to install electric power stations, charging stations all across the country. It's still pretty hard if you have an electric vehicle to find a place to charge it on a regular basis. That is going to grow by leaps and bounds. Just yesterday, Kimberly, you see that General Motors said that in the future, in just the coming years, they're not going to sell any more gas-powered cars. It's all going to be electric. So these are the opportunities we have to front and load, and we are going to need SPC and community colleges and public schools helping to train that workforce so that they are ready, and they're ready in the not too distant future.
Thank you so much. And because that's a great segue to one of these participants' questions, I think I want to ask that question. The Brookings Institute research states that landing a clean energy job can equal an 8 to 19% increase in income, and 45% of all workers in clean energy production have only a high school diploma and still receive higher wages than similarly educated peers in other industry. Knowing this, have the high schools, and you may not be able to answer this, made changes in curriculum to prepare students for a renewable world? Or I would ask, are we supporting them in any way? So sort of alter the question.
That is a great question. We have to do this now. It's incumbent upon us, if we're going to really meet our goals to get the economy back on track and provide those pathways to good paying union jobs. For example, when it comes to building clean cars, Tesla is the market leader out there, but they haven't really committed to good paying union jobs. We're going to need to do that. We have to, we're going to build the electric school buses and transit buses. You know, Pinell Suncoast Transit and Hillsborough Area Regional Transit now have electric buses coming into their fleets. We're going to need those mechanics. We're going to need the folks who will manufacture those things. So we're going to have to train this new workforce. There are parts of the country like Appalachia and others where they are deindustrialized. Maybe they were working in coal mines, and we know that over the last decade, the coal mines and coal-fired power plants are being reduced. So how are we going to lift those communities? President Biden announced this week a national transition effort because we've got to have the pipeline for jobs for those old coal mine workers to actually go and reclaim the mines. Same with if it's going to be in an area of the country where they're haven't been able to compete in gas and oil fields. We need those workers to go plug the methane leaks that are contributing to climate change. So you can see this runs the gamut. There are going to be enormous opportunities, but you're very smart to think, okay, then what are we doing in our public schools and in our community colleges and apprenticeship programs to make sure we have that skilled workforce?
Yeah, thank you so much for the context there. And really, this what we're kind of getting at between the improvement of jobs and the improvement of the environment is this idea of improving quality of life, right? And that's effectively what we want to engage in. This type of educational outreach is so fundamental to that. And it kind of begs the question, right? Well, a lot of our quality of life is derived from all forms of the government, federal government, state government, and local government. Could you maybe get into a little bit about the different roles and how you all can work together to, achieve this sustainability, have the appropriate level of infrastructure going on, and make sure that we kind of work together as a team to make sure that we accomplish these goals?
Yeah, it all works together. And since I've been in Congress, my best training going in to be a representative at the national level was service as a county commissioner back home, because everything is connected. Most of the federal funds that flow, they flow back to your local communities, and you have to trust and be in partnership with those folks. So, for example, those transit grants that go to Pinellas, Suncoast Transit, or to Hillsborough Area Transit, I've been hearing for a number of years that they want to phase out their dirty fleet and ramp up their clean fleet. And we said, okay, well, let's look at this with an equity lens too. If we're going to do that, isn't it important that those vehicles hit the streets in communities where they have higher asthma rates, where they have dirtier air, maybe because they're located next to certain industries or dirty plants? So that's one example of how it works together. Here's another that I hope will help push Florida. It's not a well-kept secret. It's out in the open. Florida is so far behind when it comes to clean energy. We're the Sunshine State, right? So you would think we're generating a lot of our electricity from solar power. We're not. It's only about 3%. 3%. So North Carolina, Georgia, New Jersey, they're all generating more electricity from clean energy, from solar power, than the Sunshine State. And part of the reason why is because of the enormous political power of our electric utilities here in the state. And here's a call to action for all of the students and all of the citizens out there. We've got to improve this situation. It is costing us enormous sums of money. The problem is the incentives here in Florida are wrong. The incentives are building expensive new plants. That's why you saw Florida Progress and now Duke go to build a big, expensive nuclear power plant and fix the one they have, because the more capital investment, the more they make in their profits. There are no incentives, really very minuscule, for energy efficiency. So the Florida legislature has a lot to say on this. The governor has a lot to say on it. They could set, like other states have, a clean energy goal, clean energy standard. They could set an energy efficiency goal and standard and have the utilities work towards that with communities. It's not so hard to say, okay, Floridians, we're going to make sure you have a smart meter in your home or business so that you can control your thermostat a little bit better. We're going to have a plan for solar panels. In fact, if you're going to put solar panels on your business or warehouse, sell that back to the grid to help us reduce our carbon footprint. So the incentives in Florida are really messed up, and hopefully what the feds can do is come in and be a forcing mechanism. We know we're paying out the wazoo for climate impacts and health impacts. We've got to improve the equation. We've got to address that equation so that Florida is looking toward clean energy, and we're not a laggard.
Yeah, no, that is just such an excellent point. Really about the economic decision process. It's all aligned with incentives and disincentives. And when there's a misalignment, you have different activities that go on. And you mentioned that maybe the federal involvement might be able to help generate some more of these desired outcomes. And I know you mentioned before things like direct subsidies and tax credits, and I know like California's cap and trade policies. Could you maybe outline some of those thoughts that you have on how the incentives can then be realigned to achieve those goals in the state of Florida?
Spoken like a true econ professor. So there in the federal budget, there are incentives and disincentives that simply do not align with where we need to go on science and our moral imperative to future generations. For example, fossil fuel companies receive enormous subsidies from the federal government. We say in our climate crisis action plan, we can't afford to do that any longer. We cannot subsidize dirty fuel sources. We want to change those those subsidies, and direct them instead towards clean energy. And we intend to do that. And now we have a president in the White House who agrees. So look for that. Tax incentives are also very important. For example, if you buy an electric vehicle, you get a rebate. We need to make sure that that continues and that grows over time. We know part of the problem with an electric vehicle, with a clean car, is that upfront cost. There was a recent story or analysis that said, boy, if you compare an electric car and a gas-powered car, over the life of that vehicle, the electric vehicle is a lot cheaper, but the problem is still that upfront cost. So we've got to address that, and we can do that through tax incentives. We know that it really matters where the federal government invests research and development dollars to promote innovation. And with the new, in partnership with the Biden administration, we intend to invest a lot more in R&D in clean energy across the gamut. When we did it in the Recovery Act, it really paid off. In fact, Tesla is where it is today because the federal government, the Congress, through the Recovery Act, invested in that cutting edge clean energy research. So those are just a few of the things.
May I jump in? Because I think we have some questions that directly relate. And so, and they're competing thoughts. So I'll read two of them and let you answer both. The first one is San Diego has set a goal of 100% renewable by 2035 and San Francisco by 2030 because we are far behind. Would it not be worth shooting for 2040? But then conversely, another participant said, so when we are getting rid of all of our regular things like our cars and stuff, what happens when the electricity fails us? Like sometimes our lights do go out and sometimes we just have random power outages, and then what happens? And I say, while you all were chatting, I was looking at the questions. We have a messaging issue that I think the entire community has to address of how we communicate these issues so that their effect, we know the impact, the effectiveness of them. But I'll let you respond.
Boy, that's a great question on reliability. So what part of where we have to grow our technology and innovation is in battery storage, so that when you are using power of the sun and from wind turbines, that we're able to store that over time. There also, remember maybe a decade ago, maybe a little longer, nuclear power was very controversial. And now the scientific community has kind of developed come in behind a consensus that we're going to continue to need nuclear power as part of the base load. So what that means for the existing nuclear power plants, it means if they can extend their licenses in a safe manner, and there is a plan for storage of nuclear fuel, used nuclear fuel, nuclear power is a very important base load power source, carbon-free, and should continue. We also recommend that we invest in the advanced nuclear, the smaller nuclear power plants. The University of Florida is actually doing tremendous research here. The issue with nuclear power, though, it's very expensive compared to renewables, solar and wind. That's one reason why Duke, they in Florida Power went to fix the Crystal River nuclear power plant, broke it, but they had asked ratepayers to pay in advance on their electric bills. So you paid all of that money and you didn't get 1 kilowatt hour out of it. I mean, billions of dollars. So we are going to have to be mindful of the cost, but battery storage, all of these technologies will continue to evolve, but we do have to maintain the reliability of being able to turn on the lights as we go forward.
And it's great that you kind of hit on some of the main sources of these renewable energies, nuclear, solar, wind, from a maybe national level and then down to a Florida level. Is there benefits from one source relative to another? Are there different policy objectives that we want to achieve to maybe stand up solar a little more aggressively in the state of Florida? And I guess, how does this total package get conveyed and brought about in how we focus our policy decisions?
Well, in our climate crisis action plan, we recommend a national clean energy standard, just like some states have set these goals, and by the way, they find out when they set those goals, they are able to meet them because the technology catches up. And again, in Florida, we have no goals whatsoever for renewable power generation or energy efficiency. We are behind. We are a laggard. So that's why it would be incredibly important for the state of Florida to enact a national clean energy standard. You don't pick what power sources then are part of the portfolio for a particular state. In Florida, we have the most potential from solar power, but in other parts of the country, they have greater resources in wind energy. A lot of other states have really gone gangbusters on energy efficiency, creating those incentives for people to conserve power when they can, and build in the more energy efficient appliances, and help businesses with smart technologies so that, for example, your office lights go off at a certain period, or you all have seen it when you walk in the room, the lights go on. And these kind of things across the economy will have enormous impact in our ability to conserve energy and then create the new renewable resources as well.
And with that, I think what becomes really interesting too is this idea behind the fixtures, and the idea behind making sure that you have timers on your lights is really conveying this cash flow perspective to businesses, right? Because, there's several different, reasons why a business will want to or consider these alternatives, these options, from an outreach standpoint, and from a defining these goals. What kind of efforts have you all undertaken to make sure that folks are really aware of these benefits that they can receive from just making simple changes, right? Changing out fixtures, turning the lights off, and making sure that it's conveyed that there is a positive benefit to your overall cash flows, to doing things that are also beneficial to the environment.
Yep, there's nothing like putting money into people's pocketbooks to get their attention. And in other states across the country, they have those kind of energy efficiency goals where their utility companies are directed to work on those incentives with businesses and with residents. And it's been so interesting in Congress to have a front row seat and see what other states are doing and then say, Florida, why can't we get our act together? And again, it goes back to the political power in Tallahassee of our electric utility. So I'm counting on all the people here. The only way you overcome political roadblocks oftentimes is through people power. So we can do this. But in Washington now, we intend to ramp up all of those energy efficient appliances, those standards. And here's why it is particularly important for our country. And you saw President Biden, as part of his orders this week, focus in on Buy American, because all of these technologies, whether it's the vehicles we manufacture in the supply chain, those appliances and new technologies, we want to win the future. We want these to be American companies, American technology that we can export to the rest of the world, especially the developing world, where of course they want a high quality of life that we enjoy. And if we don't have those cost efficient, energy efficient technologies in place, it's likely we're not going to be able to meet our net zero by 2050 worldwide goal, because they're going to rely on coal, oil, and gas. They are going to be driving different kind of cars and buses. So that's why it's so critical, and it's a competitiveness issue for us. And it gets back to, that's why it's so important to invest now, work on this now, and empower our workforce, make sure that they are the center of those good paying new clean energy jobs.
Thank you so much. I have some questions I want to make sure that we get to before Patrick and I take up all the time with more panelist participant questions. And the first question I think you touched on, but to be specific, is it how does pricing carbon fit into your thoughts and plan? Wouldn't a plan like the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend go a long way to creating the correct economic incentives to adopt green solutions?
Yeah, good question. So in our climate roadmap for the Congress, we do recommend that we put a price on carbon. And that means there is a social cost. A lot of the fossil fuel companies and utilities, they focus only on their energy costs. Meanwhile, the rest of us end up paying the cost of climate through dirty air that cost us a lot in health impacts, especially for environmental justice communities that have higher rates of asthma and now are dealing with COVID at disproportionate rates. Again, our property insurance, our flood insurance, our electric bills. So it's not really fair that the fossil fuel companies, utilities, never have to bear that cost. It's all part of the community cost. So in order to shift that cost and make sure that those products are answering for their true cost, we do recommend putting a price on carbon. But after analysis, we said that is not a silver bullet. That's not the be all end all. We've got to do the whole range of things, setting a clean energy standard, investing in R&D, making sure it's done in an equitable way, providing the workforce training and transition. But we say, okay, Congress, you have a little more work to do if you wanted to look at some carbon tax or another cap and trade system. So that remains to be seen if the Congress will go down that pathway as we're doing the rest of the strategy.
Another question also touches on what you said about, disadvantaged communities or communities that have equitable challenges. And this participant says, I support clean energy and hope to see a big boom in the job market for it. But I've also seen firsthand that it can be a very hard field for people of color and immigrants to break into. I know incredibly qualified people with college degrees in renewable energy who have been unable to get hired in even the most entry-level positions because they have a foreign sounding name or still have an accent from their home country. What can we do to make sure these talented people can also have access to this new and growing industry?
That's a very important point. And I think you have to have policymakers in place who understand this. And I'm very confident in the new Biden administration, even though they've only been on the job for a week. Uh, if you examine the executive orders that have rolled out so far, what the Biden strategy proposes is to put equity at the center of everything. There was direction to every agency. It's going to be tied to every investment that we make, that we take into account uh, all the beautiful diversity of this country, and understand that there are communities that have borne the burden. But this is very interesting too, how we guarantee that there is a pathway to those good paying jobs. And I think this new National Transition Office and the assignment to the Commerce Department on everything they do on economic development, we've got to put it into law. It won't be good enough to just include it in executive orders that can be rolled back after the next presidential election. We really need to make these durable and pass them into law. And that's what we intend to do in the Congress. I know it doesn't look easy with a 50-50 split in the Senate, but I think we can get there. And again, with people power, with folks like you weighing in with our senators, I think we can get there.
Well, I have two more questions I'm going to try to lump together so Patrick can ask one more question before we move on to your overview lens of anything you want to share with us about where we lie right now in our nation. And one is about the costs associated with nuclear power. How does nuclear power square with our moral obligation to future generations? And the other question is about if the other countries don't do it, what will happen? So we get to zero. What happens if we don't get the other countries on board? And after you respond, I will have Patrick take the last question before we move on to a different but short topic.
Well, that's a great question on other countries, because we have been fortunate, even during the Trump years, that local communities and colleges and universities and businesses have kind of been in the lead on clean energy and energy efficiency and environmental justice. But there's just no substitute for a national plan and national leadership. So I'm very hopeful. We won't be able to meet that 2050 goal or ensure equity across the world unless the United States of America is in the lead. We are the world leader. We have to reclaim that mantle and rally the industrialized countries of the world to this cause. They are so happy to have Joe Biden in the White House. And you probably saw that President Biden asked former Secretary of State John Kerry to return to be his international climate envoy. They're already hard at work on determining more ambitious goals for carbon pollution reduction, greenhouse gas pollution reduction. There is a huge conference next November that was put off because of COVID called the Conference of Parties, where all the countries across the planet come together and they will re-examine their goals. But we can't wait till November. The Biden administration has said, no, over the next couple of months, we're going to determine how much more ambitious we can be. And on Earth Day in April, convene a summit here in America. Hopefully it's not virtual, maybe it will be, that where all of the countries can come in and lay out those new nationally determined contributions, which means how far they can go in the near term and what their goals will be. And yes, that will include nuclear power. In France, they rely a lot on carbon-free nuclear power. Like I said, we recommended it remain part of our energy mix. But I think when you look at it net on cost over time, it will be clean energy, truly renewable solar, wind, energy efficiency, being able to store that will get us to where we need to be.
And I'd love to end with kind of like just a big picture discussion. What's fascinating about the economy, right, global, US, state level, is that we have these wonderful interdependencies between different industries. And as one industry starts to rise, there's reciprocal effects to other industries. It's almost like that we have these mutual benefits. So if we have this infrastructure investment into clean energy and we have new job growth that have higher paying and compensations, this will then trickle through the rest of the economy. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that and how you see that just this big picture effect of us focusing on the clean energy having these ripple effects throughout the US and even the globe.
Well, I'll give you one example. A couple weeks ago, a CEO from a clean energy company called and he said, "Oh, I have some good news. We're going to build wind turbines for new offshore wind projects in the US. We don't have a lot of offshore wind in the US," but he said, and guess what? We want to come to Tampa. We want to come to Port Tampa Bay to help us build the ships that we're going to need to help transfer all of the new wind turbines onto the offshore areas. I thought, well, that's kind of neat, and I think that's what we're going to see. We're going to see those ripple effects. That's why it's so important that we outcompete China and other parts of the world for these clean energy technologies and the entire industry, because that's a benefit to our neighbors, our workers, and training them. And then we can expand. We're in a leadership position. We can help expand to other parts of the globe. And you just want to be in the lead, just like you want it to be American-made cars, clean electric vehicles. You want it to be I visited the Proterra electric bus factory a little over a year ago in Southern California. I said, boy, we have a lot of school buses and transit buses in Florida. Why don't you come and build one of these factories? Here, we don't do a lot of manufacturing in Florida, but I think they're going to South Carolina. But this isn't going to happen by accident. We have to have a coordinated plan and really work with all of these industries to make sure these are good paying jobs, they're union jobs, they are available to the folks who really need them, and that they're doing it in partnership, again, with our public schools, community colleges, and labor unions. So we're not asleep at the switch. We have that talented workforce to help us get to where we need to be according to the science and our moral call to action.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, when you're talking about this messaging, it's going to take time, but we're a benefactor of Duke Energy. Our workforce department actually received, I believe the total amount was 100,000, but it could be more for solar panel work. And of course, they are also a sponsor of ISPS. And you start talking to individuals and it's what you see in terms of the participants and what they're saying. I think there is an overall goal to get to this point. It's how we all manage the equitable challenges and the messaging and how it impacts our lives as we make this big shift. So for those of you all who aren't aware, we are launching huge series this year. I would like to thank the Institute for Economic Evolution for engaging in some of these series with us, as well as the many entities, nonprofits, private organizations that are supporting us. Our next program is Thursday, February 18th with IEE, the Institute for Economic Evolution. It's an economic series on cultivating B Corps for people, planet, and prosperity. Please tune into that. After that, on the 19th, In light of COVID, it's really important to talk about guardianship issues and how it impacts us. So we will have a 3-part guardianship series on when it's appropriate and what it is exactly. Next slide, please. For Black History Month, we're going to be celebrating with Justice Peggy Quince, who is the first African-American justice to sit on the Florida Supreme Court. We're doing it in alliance with the Seminole campus of Student Life and Leadership, and that is on What Does Justice Mean? And we thank them for their collaboration. So finally, I want to say thank you again for joining us for our first program of the year. We hope that you were able to engage and learn something about clean energy and the economy. We would like to thank Representative Castor and her incredible team for working with us to get through this so quickly in light of the many responsibilities she has at this time. And I'd like to thank Patrick Luce, our first co-moderator of the year, for doing an exceptional job of leading challenging questions. And with that, I say thank you for joining ISPS, and until next time.
You know, civic engagement is so important, not only to St. Petersburg College, but to the benefit of our entire community. What we hope to do at St. Petersburg College, especially in the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions, our goal is to be the catalyst for change. We want to be the convener, the individuals who pull everybody together to talk about a common cause and a plan, to build the mission and the strategy, to move forward and make this county, this state, and our world a better place to live, learn, and play.